Check, check.
Swapping.
I'll just swap out just in case we're. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Still fun, but we want to here.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so what do I mean by buzzword? I mean something like, like a gotcha, something like, I don't know, what are people doing these days? Battle Royale, that's a popular one, right? Give me something, some buzzword. Free to play, would you say? Open world, free to play, hack and slash, perfect. Okay, beautiful. Love this. You made something that's very hard for me to draw on a whiteboard, but that's fine. I get what I asked for. Okay, let's do something like this. Let's make this a little bit unusual and a little bit easier for me to actually do this in the span of this. Let's do something where this is a sort of like a top-down, third-person, free-to-play, open world vampire hack and slash game, vampire hunting hack and slash game. So we're gonna have a character that's in the middle of the screen. You can get various weapons and things like that. You run into vampires. You can clearly see that's a vampire. Look, it has fangs. And across an open world, it's a free to play, so as you're going around, you can just play and find vampires, but you can also, of course, buy weapons and upgrades and so on and so on and so forth. Sounds good? So there's sort of, as we'll get into it later, the sort of general game loop for this will be wandering around, killing vampires with weapons you currently have, or running into a vampire you can't quite kill, but then going and finding other vampires to kill, using the vampire kill points, we'll come up with a better name than that later maybe, to be able to get new weapons or unlock new abilities, and then go and kill more and more vampires, etc., etc., etc. Sounds great? Okay, cool. There's our video game. Ah, VIPs. Perfect. Love that. Okay, so now we have our game, so let's talk about frameworks. So, Flow. So to say a name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. Sorry. It's Czech, I think. I don't remember. This is this concept called flow. Flow was not originated to talk about video games, but video games have adopted flow as a principal way of talking about experiences in games. As you can see here, flow can be easily represented on a single diagram. We have challenges from low to high. We have skills from low to high. Those are our two axes of this graph here. And then you can see we have a sort of flow channel when we have a match for our skill and our challenge. When our skill is too low and our challenge is too high, that leads to anxiety. When our skill is too high and our challenge is too low, that leads to boredom. So flow is a very common way of talking about how do you structure over time your game design. You want to continually have the player go up against challenges that match their skill level, and that will keep them in what's called a flow state. Some people experience flow, other people don't experience flow. It's actually this whole psychological thing to study it. If you've ever found that you've been playing a game that's kind of like a mindless game and you've like lost a whole bunch of time playing that, you are in a flow state. Congratulations, you are capable of experiencing flow. Other people don't. But for many people, this is sort of a goal with game design. In particular, when mobile games became big and popular, roughly 10, 15 years ago for the first time, this was the number one thing everybody was trying to achieve. And they were trying to achieve it because what they wanted you to do was sit on your phone for as long as possible, playing the game for as long as possible, right?
There's a similar concept also in talking about like tutorials teaching of this zone process development.
Totally.
Zone.
Yep. This is a concept from Psych, so it inspired other concepts that are somewhat related, et cetera, et cetera. So how would we use this in terms of our not a Vampire Survivors clone? Trust me, it's not. Because it's open world and it's free to play, so obviously it's not Vampire Survivors. So what we would do here is we would want to structure things, if we wanted to apply flow, to tell us how do we sequence things. If this is open world, then we'd want to do something along the lines of sort of the closer versus further away from the player's starting position. If we imagine like a global map, so now here's our global map, here's where our player starts, right? And we can think about placing things in order where the challenge is going to increase the farther the player goes in any direction, right? So we could say something like, okay, the very first basic thing might be something like, just killing a like one-shot enemy, right? So an enemy that will just take a single hit, right? That's the simplest skill. You'll note this is skills, so that's a number of skills that we're going to take, right? That you might need. We just go up to an enemy, we hit the kill button, the enemy dies. Fantastic, right? Maybe the next thing that we need is, okay, you can't just kill it in a single hit. You need to be able to dodge. So you need to be able to like dodge the player or the enemy that's trying to hit you and hit them, right? So this would be like an enemy with like more than one hit point and enough damage on them that you need to actually dodge their attacks, right? And then we can think about chaining multiple dodges and hits necessary to be able to get it, and so on, and so on, and so on, right? So keep on going along the x-axis for as many sort of kinds of skills and combination of those skills as you can imagine within your game, right? And then over on this side, we'd have our challenges. So like a single enemy, single weak enemy might be our initial one. Then we might have a sort of medium enemy, one that will take a few hits. Then maybe a sort of set of small enemies, and etc. going in the other direction, right? Going up this way. And this would tell you roughly how should those things be matched up in terms of the skills to the challenges within your game, so on and so on and so forth. If this wasn't an open world game, but it was instead like a level-based game, like think about like your Marios or your Sonics or things like that, right? Traditional Sonics and Marios. We now have open world Sonics and Marios. What a world we live in. But if you think about those originally, right, we think about the challenges as the levels that you face, right? So you'd want to sequence your levels in such a way that they were using these skills in this sort of sequential fashion. That might seem self-obvious, or like self-evident, self-obvious, super simple, right? Match your skills to your challenge, but actually forcing you to go down and think through, here are all the skills you need to play this game, going all the way from just the very first thing you should learn to the very last thing you should learn, is a useful exercise, right? Okay, so with that, we've got flow. That's how flow works. Some takeaways. This is good for games with linear progression in terms of challenge and skills, right? So the fact that you made me do an open world game means that flow is maybe not the best fit, but we could think about, you know, ways that we can change that, right? So like this zone would be challenge 1, only that sort of simple enemies. This zone is challenge 2. This would be challenge 3, and this sort of sequence going up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that way we know for sure if you go in any one direction, you have to face the challenges in this order, right? It's good for games where we want players to be immersed in sort of the moment-to-moment gameplay, right? So this is like games where we have sort of a hack and slash thing, where like we really want them focused and like really deep immersed into what's happening moment to moment. If this is for a sort of like a cerebral game, right, like a puzzle game, or like a narrative-heavy game where we want them thinking like critically about what they're experiencing, flow is a bad thing. We don't want them sort of mindlessly playing the game, right? We want them actually thinking through things more. So it's bad if you don't want a mindless game, and it's basically useless. It doesn't tell you anything about the aesthetic elements of the game, right? This only tells you about mechanical elements of the game, right? This doesn't tell me anything about what the game should look like or sound like or anything like that. Make sense? Okay, cool. On to the next one. Again, we're doing this fast. So next we get to mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics, aka the MDA framework. This is a fairly popular framework. It's based on an academic paper. These weirdos like Joseph and myself who are games academics. Oh, what a strange concept. I'll talk about it a little bit more. Let me get the bullet points up. So this was attempted to create a formal approach to understanding games. It was never meant as a game design tool. Now, despite that, people immediately tried to use it as a game design tool. They were immediately like, I'm going to ignore that fact that you said this was about like talking about games, and I want to figure out how this would tell me how to make games. Not actually what it was intended for at all. But basically, we had definitions from the papers for these 3 aspects. We have mechanics. I literally have quoted from the paper here, which is why it's a bit long. Mechanics describes the particular components of the game at the level of data representation in like rules, algorithms, or code, right? So this is saying what is like the bits of the game, the actual like code of the game or the level of the game, things like that. Dynamics are the runtime behavior of the mechanics acting on player inputs and each other's outputs over time. So basically, mechanics by themselves are just mechanics. They don't do anything. When a player comes along and strings mechanics together, that's dynamics, right? So like Mario's jump would be an example of dynamics because it takes a player to make the jump happen. A mechanic would be if you hit the jump button, Mario velocity, Y velocity changes, right? That would be a mechanic. But it's only when it comes together and a player actually jumps, that's a dynamic. Finally, we have an aesthetic, which describes the desirable emotional response to be evoked in the player when they use she throughout because it was like this very third wave feminist thing, not important, when she interacts with the game system. So let's talk about MDA in terms of our vampire game. So the way that this would work generally, where'd my black marker go? There it goes, is we'd want to think about how these three aspects, we basically take our game elements and write down each of them in terms of these three buckets, okay? So in terms of mechanics, I'll start there, mechanics. So our mechanics would be things like, how do we actually move? Is this a click to move? Are we moving with the arrow keys? Is this, something where I can set a cursor, like I'm in an RTS game, and then my character will move there, right? It's down to that level, right? So let's say that I use something like a D-pad is movement, right? But then also every sort of important rule in the game, right? So if I hit the A button is an attack, right? If attack hits enemy, enemy dies. If enemy hits player, player dies, etc. Right? I'm not going to keep going, but every single thing we'd have in the game, we'd want to like list out here. So for example, you might have like a healing item, or you might have some ability to, reset the spawns in our open world. Any of those individual like rules of the game would be listed out here. In effect, you would never actually go through and list every single thing, because that would be a nightmare. But what it can do, at least initially when you're thinking about a game, is it can force you to think at this level. Often when people are designing, they will start by thinking about the dynamics. Oh, I want combat. Okay, but how does that combat actually work, right? This forces you to think about that. Speaking of, if we were to write down the dynamics, this would be things like combat, probably like weapon upgrade system, grade system, etc. Finally, for aesthetics, in the original paper, they defined a set of aesthetics, which were all the aesthetics they thought existed in video games. And they said you have to use one of these aesthetics or some set of these aesthetics. These were things like exploration is an aesthetic. Now, to me, given their definition, which is still being projected, you might say, is exploration a emotional response? I don't know. But anyway, they said it was, so we'll keep on going with that. Later on, Matt LeBlanc, who is one of the authors of this, he continues to do a GDC workshop every single year. He would expand this a little bit to say, the aesthetic is whatever you want the aesthetics to be. So like I could write fun here, right? Like I want the game to be fun. You might laugh and say, well, of course a video game should be fun. But no, a video game could be not fun, and that could be an intentional part of the experience, right? Sometimes there's good frustration in games, etc. Make sense? Totally. Totally. Go play The Graveyard, the game where you play as a grandma who slowly walks forward and sits on a bench, etc. Right? Okay, so that's MDA. Does that make sense? Any questions on how you apply MDA? All right. So let's talk about the issues with MDA. I can't cover MDA without talking about the issues. So it's not used in the majority of game studios. It's really only used in the studios where a large number of the developers were trained at an institution that uses MDA. Or for example, if you went to Matt LeBlanc's GDC workshop and then you were like, I'm in love with MDA now. It's the perfect way to talk about video games. That's really the only cases where it comes up. I'm going to give some quotes here. Sorry, I forgot my own bit. Here's some quotes, and I'll tell you where the quotes are from in a second. There are stark terminology differences between MDA and contemporary design practices, aka nobody uses these terminologies in this way. Nobody uses dynamics to mean this. What on earth are you talking about? Using the term dynamics to describe the gameplay is virtually unheard of in practice, and later on the same person would have a quote about aesthetics. The dynamics part of MDA is too ambiguous. MDA's model, the designer and the player at opposite ends, is idealized but confusing. I didn't cover this, but it assumes that the designer starts at mechanics and then works their way to aesthetics. and that players experience the aesthetics first and then sort of think about the mechanics later. That's not actually true. Nobody designing games starts with, well, I think you're going to hit the right button and you'll move 3 units at a time. Nobody does that. I mean, maybe somebody does that. Almost nobody does that, right? All these quotes are by Rob Zubek, who is one of the original co-authors of MDA. So some serious problems there. There's Rob Zubek. That's what he looks like. He now works at Zynga. Also, we have Robin Hunicke, who's one of the other co-authors, and she's a complicated figure. So she was a producer on Journey, which is one of the best games ever made. She was considered an games industry darling for many years. She was considered this big sort of breakthrough on a number of facets. She brought Keita Takahashi, who was the Katamari guy, to her studio Funimation in 2014. She fought with Takahashi, leading to him to build a physical barricade between their offices. Game finally shipped that they were working on after 5 years. There's also allegations of abuse, mismanagement, intellectual property theft. She's a complicated person. Anyway. No, he should have, but it was made out of cardboard. So MDA was never meant as a prescriptivist, which means that you would apply this to tell you what a good game design is. It was never meant as that kind of framework, but it was used as that anyway. It was an attempt to formalize game design by, at the time, one industry vet and 2 academics from Northwestern University in the States who had some game design experience. Here's a quote from one of my buddies who at the time was working at Don't Nod Studio, who is a Life is Strange folks. He said, I've heard of it, but I haven't engaged with it a great deal. I'm even less likely to apply it to anything I would do in my day-to-day life, given the top author of the paper is Robin Hunicke, which gives you a sense of how well she is perceived these days. So, but generally speaking, not great people can still make great tools. Let's get to Zubek's follow-up. So all those quotes are from the introduction to Elements of Game Design, which is just Zubek saying, I want to do MDA again, but better. He didn't name the framework, though, so I'm just going to call it EOGD, which is Elements of Game Design, the name of this book. So as I said, it is his answer to MDA, and these are the definitions of his setup from the book. He once again has mechanics. He says the mechanics are the game objects and actions that the player interacts with. Okay? This is a slightly different thing from the mechanics in here, because not only does it give us the code, but it also says game objects are part of mechanics. So that's like if you had a board game, all the pieces on the board would be game objects. If we were in Unity, anything that you just saw was a game object is a game object. Isn't that nice? Gameplay, we've replaced dynamics. Gameplay is the process of interacting with the mechanics. So once we bring a player in and they're doing things with the mechanics, that's gameplay. And that actually fits with our sort of expectations, right? This makes sense as a word to use for this. Dynamics didn't really make sense, but gameplay actually fits with how we use these terms. Finally, player experience is the replacement for aesthetics, is the player's subjective experience of that gameplay. So he sort of visualizes it working like this. Where we have a designer who thinks about mechanics and systems. That leads them to gameplay. That leads them to a player experience. Now, notably, there's some questions here in terms of what counts as game objects. So to Zubek, game objects are only things that interact with the mechanics. So if you have like a score, that's a game object. But if you have like a background, that's not a game object because it's a piece of art in the background, so it doesn't count, right? We're purely interested in sort of mechanical objects.
He already used definitional model. This affects this. Player experience sometimes comes in from like music in the game.
Yeah, we'll get to it in just a second. That's a very good impulse. It's a great impulse. So according to Zubek, only virtual or physical things the player interacts with are the game objects. Does this include sounds, visuals, or narrative outside the player's subjective experience? Sort of, but not really. Yep, exactly. So one of the nice things is MDA only thought that designers started with mechanics, which is a wild thing to say, and then they went to gameplay, and then they went to player experience. Zubek is going to broaden that a little bit, because unsurprisingly, Zubek was the guy who starts with mechanics and then goes to dynamics and then aesthetics. But he's going to say, okay, you can start on either end. You can do top-down design, where we're going to start with an intended player experience. That's probably how most of you think about game design, right? You're imagining what the game would be like to play first. And then once we know about what the game was going to be like to play, then we can think about, okay, what should the gameplay be like? And then what would the mechanics be like to allow that gameplay to exist? That would be top-down design. Bottom-up design would be starting with these game elements and the mechanics, and then building up to what do I think the player experience will be if I start with these mechanics and game objects. Make sense? Zubek, by the way, makes sim games, right? Which is why he thinks like this. It makes a lot of sense, right? So one of the nice things here is that this is meant as a design tool instead of just a descriptive tool. It acknowledges the way that other people design games besides Zubek, which is great, and it uses industry-specific language. So you basically have this framework tool that says that the designer can affect these, the player experience, and at the end of the day, by manipulating these, the mechanics and systems of the game. Now, to your earlier point, let's get back there. So EOGD does, in fact, address sound, music, and writing. It's our first one of these frameworks to do that. Isn't that exciting? But it does that as sort of like some sort of strange other. Who knows where those come from? We don't really understand how that works. Story, setting in characters, visual design, art assets, and user interface? I don't know. That's outside the purity of mechanics, so they don't really matter to the same extent, but I guess they impact player experience, right? This is being a little bit, unfair, but I'm doing this on purpose to tell you sort of this is what this framework is good for. It's good for modeling mechanics and systems. It's not so good for modeling these other things. Does that make sense?
This to me is a complex system with far more errors.
Yes, totally. And you can basically swap out just the names here, and we have exactly the same set, right? We have mechanics, we have dynamics, we have aesthetics. It's just now called mechanics, gameplay, and player experience. Cool? Cool. Okay, so some takeaways from this one. EOGD is basically just MDA 2.0. It's good for systems or gameplay-based player experience. So like board games, sim games, things like that. It's a really nice way to force you to think through what are the mechanics, what are the systems at play, things like that. It is bad for narrative or non-systems-y games. If you are building a game like that, this is not your friend. This is not the way that you're going to want to think about games. It is used in the industry even less than MDA, but that's partially just timing. It only came out a few years ago, so it just hasn't had the time to have that same advance. And with that, let's get into the next one. Game loops / objective challenge reward. I'm still going to use Zubek's figures because they're really good. This is also from his original book. So OCR, as it's commonly referred to, has no one group of creators. It arose through systems design, which is actually thinking about like systems that humans are in, and then it was sort of adopted into games. So for example, I learned it from Jonathan Knight, who's the Sims 2 producer. He was like a big figure if you're making Sims 2. And it's basically focused on repeated player actions. What are the player actions the player is going to be doing over and over and over again, right? So the player acts in the environment, and they observe the effects, and then they continue to act based on that. So we can think about a game with fast loops only. So this would be a game where like we're only doing the same thing sort of over and over and over again really, really frequently. So if anybody's ever played like a cookie clicker or any sort of clicker game, right? That's that. It's just the base game, when you first start out, only has fast loops. All you're doing is clicking. But if anybody's played a clicker game, you'll note that pretty soon what you do in most clicker games is you buy things that will click for you. And now we've added extra loops, right? You've added these loops on top of that. But this kind of loop layering is super common in modern game design. In all kinds of games, you will find this sort of loop layering in terms of what your actions are. It is explicitly, this OCR approach is explicitly a design tool. It is telling you how to make a good game according to this framework, right? That's not me saying that, to be clear. I'm not saying this is how to make a good game, but the framework says this is how to make a good game. So thinking about what your player should be doing every second, every minute, every 5, every 20, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Up until the complete sort of time it takes to finish the game. There's a belief with some evidence that layering those loops makes gameplay more engaging. More on that in just a sec. And it also makes players spend more. So, for example, I mentioned Jonathan Knight. I learned this from him while I was at Zynga because OCR gets engagement and money out of you. So if you've ever played like a Farmville or any other sort of like online simi game like this, they're perfectly set up so that every few seconds you have a thing to do. Oh, but every minute you have to come back and check another thing. Oh, but every 5 minutes you have to come back and check another thing. And every 10 minutes you have to come back and check another thing. And it's layered and it's deep, and there's always something to do at different time scales. So you get a lot of variety. Maybe Farmville is too old for you, but I suspect you'll recognize this next one. So Genshin Impact is another example which is highly based on OCR. It is a beautiful tuned machine. The moment-to-moment gameplay has these like regular events of just like you moving through the world, but then there's quests that you go on, which add this extra layer above just the moment-to-moment going through the world. Then there's also, whole setups people will do of breakdowns of like timings of these things. There's event calendars at a high level of certain, when a certain character is available for you to get, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's always something to do. It is layered, so there's different levels at which you are doing these things. It is perfectly driven to get young kids to spend as much time and money as possible playing this game. It's a work of art and also the devil. So let's talk about OCR as a design tool. The most common way that you end up talking about these loops, just so that you can actually represent them as a loop, is with something called an onion diagram. So an onion diagram is a way of representing that we have these sort of layered loops. Now, it only really works if you only have like a single layer. If you have like multiple things at the same layer, it doesn't work super well. But generally, most games break down pretty nicely into onion diagrams, right? So, and this is like Monopoly. People play Monopoly? Yeah, good. So every sort of minute of the game, what are you doing? You're moving on the board and you're getting or you're losing money, right? That's like the default activity, the default loop you do over and over and over again, right? You take, you turn, you do something. Every 5-ish minutes, you should be buying property or hotels. This is sort of an idealized case where you're not losing the game. Every 20 minutes, you're completing some set, right? You're completing a whole area. Now, most people have not actually played Monopoly for more than 60 minutes, and if you had, it's just a chore. But every 60 minutes, you're like bankrupting another player, right? So if you're the one winning, it's awesome. If you're the one losing, it's not, right? But this gives you a sense of like, this is the layers of Monopoly, right? And this is why when you're the one winning, it's a super engaging experience. Putting two of these onion diagrams next to each other lets you do a really cool thing, which it lets you do this sort of comparison. So on the left, we have Diablo, and on the right, we have The Sims. So their lowest level loot or loop, right, in Diablo is you're killing and looting something. In The Sims, you're eat, pooping, and sleeping, right? You're just being a sim, right? You're controlling your Sims. But on the next level, in Diablo, you are venturing out, you're fighting, you're returning, and you're selling and you're trading. This is what we call the core loop of the game. It's the thing that keeps you playing the game because it's repeated, right? You have to go out, you have to get money, you buy some things. Oh no, you're out of money. You need to go out, you need to get money. You buy some things. Oh no, you're out of money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And when we look at The Sims, oh wow, this is very similar, right? You go to work, you make money, you spend that on new cool little objects to put in your Sims house. You then socialize, you go out, you work, you make money, you buy more things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we can see the core loops of these games, despite the fact that Diablo and The Sims are very different video games, right, actually have a lot in common in terms of the core thing that's going on, right? And then, of course, at the higher levels, they're quite a bit different, right? In Diablo, you progress through levels, skill trees, et cetera. In The Sims, you advance at work. So it's actually kind of similar, but you definitely do not build friendships and have a family in Diablo. That would be a very different game. And then at the top level of Diablo, you're experiencing this sort of high-level story, which tends to be like this linear experience, right? But in The Sims, you're managing a neighborhood. It could go on forever, right? Does that all make sense? So let's think about this in terms of our vampire game. If we were to do this, we'd think about what's the sort of minute to, or the second to second loop. Like every few seconds, what do we be doing in the game? I think what we'd be doing at the lowest level is probably like fighting and getting our VIP points, right? Which we've determined are what did you say, vampire something points? Vampire immolation points, obviously, because we're using the power of the sun. Praise the sun. At the next highest level, right, what would we be doing with that? Well, we'd already talked about it a little bit, that we'd probably want to go through and have like a weapon upgrade system, right? So we'd probably be doing some sort of weapon upgrade. And that would spend all of our VIP points in such a way that would prompt us to go back and go kill more vampires, right? So that's our sort of core loop. It'd be a very similar core loop to like Diablo or The Sims or these sorts of things. At our next highest loop, we'd probably want to do something like explore a new area. Since this is an open world game, right? We'd explore some new region of the game, which would come with like new kinds of enemies, and therefore new things we would have to upgrade our weapon against. And then finally, if this was like a linear experience, we'd probably have like a sort of linear story going on. So in our linear story, if this is a linear story game, an open world game with a linear story, they're fairly common, right? This loop would only happen once. We would go through the whole loop once. But as part of that, we would have some number of loops where we'd explore a new area, right? Let's say we had 4 areas in the game. We'd loop through that 4 times. We would go through this weapon upgrade system many, many times, and we'd go through this fighting and getting these VIP points many, 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 many times. Make sense?
So if we were to change the setting to a
Sure.
and
Yeah. Well, if we even had the story, right? So if this is a roguelike with a story for sure, right? That could be there, but it could also be at this level, right? This is a great example of how OCR can be used. We can think about, well, is this something where this is a roguelike element that replaces this story and it's just like every run, right? Or is this something where, oh no, we have a story, but there's a higher level loop here, which is like, oh, we're restarting, right, with a new character, we're rerunning with a new build, etc. Cool? Any other questions on OCR? Sure. Yeah. So there's definitely similarities here between certain kinds of like cyclical narratives, right? If you're thinking about TV shows, this is especially common in like kids media that are really formulaic, right? I have a nephew who loves watching the Spider-Man and his friends or whatever it's called, and every single episode is the exact same formula, right? A villain shows up, a Spidey has to go attack the villain. The Spidey is momentarily troubled by something, and then the Spidey overcomes it and they beat the villain and save the day. And then that repeats for every single episode, right? So this tends to be really good as well for, it's simple in such a way that it's not really going to entertain an adult, maybe, but it's really good for like children's TV, especially. Good question. Any other questions? Okay. So those are your takeaways. This is assuming a top-down design, in Zubek's words, that's how he would describe it, where we start from the player experience, right, that highest level, and then we sort of drill it down and to figure out what's needed at that lowest level of like moment to moment, what's someone doing in the game. I find this is especially good for people who are just starting making games, because you can often think about, ooh, this is the big high-level cool thing that I want. Here's my cool idea for a story. But sometimes it's actually tough to think about, okay, what's the second-to-second thing you're doing in this video game? Or maybe you have the second-to-second thing, but that doesn't actually build you out into the rest of the story, or the rest of the game. Zubik would say that OCR fits in the mechanics part of mechanics, gameplay, and player experience. You put player experience first. This implicitly then includes art, music, writing, but does not explicitly include them, right? Because you're going to have to experience the art, the music, and the writing, and so on and so forth, but it doesn't tells you what to do with those. And it does include mechanics, gameplay, player experience into a single structure that some games follow. So not all games, right? But a lot of games, especially modern games, especially free-to-play games that want you playing for long periods of time and spending money on them, they love OCR. So OCR is super popular in terms of those kinds of games. Cool? And it's very popular in the games industry because of it. So if you talk to someone, they may not know the word OCR, but they might know it as game loops. They might know it by any sorts of other sorts of names, systems thinking, et cetera, but they'll know of the concepts. Okay, with that, we're going to get to the last framework we're going to talk about. We're only going a little bit behind, so that's good. So we're going to talk about game feel. So this is by this guy named Steve Swink. And game feel is this extremely detailed breakdown of what moment-to-moment playing a video game is like. So we have this nice figure up here. We'll talk you through it. So you can see it's a loop, right? So the loops sort of naturally sort of continue into here. We have on the player side, it starts with the senses. So this includes all senses that you are experiencing from a game. That is your sight, your sound, your touch, and your proprioception, which is basically like your general senses of things, right? Sort of a holistic sense of things. Then that goes into your brain, right? Your brain is going to process that information, and it's going to, as you can see here, you're going to have a little like a version of the game running in your brain, which is your understanding of the video game, right? And then that allows you to then control your muscles, which allows you to control your output, whether that's your hands, your arms, or your feet, right? There's some people who don't have hands and then play games with like touch pads. There's all sorts of different ways of doing this, but this is the way you output, you control things. This is going to some kind of controller, whether that's a joystick, some sort of mouse, et cetera, et cetera. That is then going through the computer's processor. It's processing that input, and that's displaying the screen, the speakers, any sort of rumble motors if you have like rumble in your game, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a holistic view, everything that goes on in terms of moment to moment, what it is like to play a game. Make sense? Cool. There's an even expanded version of this, where we have this great figure I really, really like, because we have this like generic or like abstracted human who is just like an eye floating in space with like cognitive process and perceptual processes and things like that. And then there's the game there as well. So this is from a book, Steve Swink's book. This is no longer published, but you can still get copies, including if, I don't know, you Google the phrase game feel, you might be able to find something. I didn't say anything about anything. This was published originally in 2008. Steve Swink was a bit of an indie darling. If you remember Robin Hunicke, you're maybe going, uh-oh about that. And the pitch basically is that everything about a game contributes to that game's feel, that game's feeling of how it feels when you're interacting with it, right? And it says, okay, different games have distinct game feels. They have distinct ways of feeling when you play these games. So why do I say uh-oh there? Well, Steve Swink basically disappeared after getting a game funded on Kickstarter in 2013. Just sort of disappeared from the public view. Scale, I don't think, is ever going to come out. There's a Vice article from that from a few years ago saying, hey, whatever happened about that? And the answer is nothing. But there's a really good book. It's a really good book, Game Feel, because it really breaks down how the tiny decisions in the game impact a game's feel. So for example, let's think about something really simple, like when you press a button. So Swink has this great breakdown of this in terms of basically thinking about this through music theory of attack, delay, sustain, release, right? So when you hit a button to have something happen in a game, if it immediately responds, that's a fast attack. It's immediately responding, it's immediately responsive. If it takes a long time to respond, then that feels sort of floaty. It feels like it has sort of a weightlessness to it, right? If you think about something that has like a sort of tight feel to it, think about like certain kinds of platformer games have a very tight feeling to them. It's because they have a fast attack for every single one of the button presses. Then we have a sort of sustain, this middle period here. The delay is how long it takes for the attack. The sustain is how long that goes for. So if it goes really short, then it might feel like you have a very rapid response. If it goes for a long time, it might feel like, oh, I press a single button, I had this big impact, right? And then we have a release. Once I release the button, how quickly does the thing I was doing stop happening? If you ever controlled like Super Mario in the original Super Mario Brothers, there's actually a kind of slow release. If you're like running and stuff and you stop pressing a button, Mario actually takes a few frames before he stops moving, right? And that gives you the sense that Mario is like a thing with physics, a thing with weight, right? In a way that you wouldn't otherwise. So this is how all of these things contribute down into game feel, right? So the top will feel really tight and responsive. The bottom will feel sort of loose and fluid. And different kinds of games will suggest different kinds of feelings, right? If you're playing a game that's supposed to feel like dreamlike, or where you're sort of like moving through water or something like that, the bottom will feel much more appropriate than the top. Make sense? Okay, so we have a lot of examples of quote unquote good game feel here. So let's see. Maybe bring up one of these. Bring this up. Oh no, I first have to learn all about Walmart. There we go. Come on, come on, come on. Come on. Yes, I now know everything about Walmart. Thank you. Okay, so this is a game called Leap Day by Nitrom. Leap Day is this game that I think generally Nitrom has really good game feel. This is running a little bit slow. But you can see every time you hit the button there and you're sort of doing this jump, right? You can see there's all these things happening. There's like this particle effect going behind you. You immediately respond and like jump off things, right? There's all these interesting things where like the character's animating to show this sort of like, oh, the speed and like the scariness of this. The sound effects are contributing to this. Every aspect of the game, including if we were to bring in like writing, would contribute to the feeling of the game, right? So that's the argument from Steve Swink. And I don't have the full time to sort of break down all of this because we're running a little bit late, and there's some narrative examples here. I'll get these slides to somebody and post them as well. But that's the example of sort of how game feel works. In terms of for our Vampire Survivors sort of game, right, we could think about, okay, in the moment to moment thing of me controlling an attack, right, what should that attack feel like, right? So we probably want it to feel like big and powerful and super responsive, right? If that's true, this tells us a lot. Game feel tells us a lot. Yeah,
Great system too. So I would say as time goes in early on in play, you could have it be that it's really mushy and kind of
sure.
unsure that as your upgrades happen, you also tighten the gameplay, give that sense to the player. I'm also more powerful because my attacks seem quicker and feel, more powerful. And
Totally.
you're gonna have a long delay at the start, that wind up, but then I have a long release that
Yeah.
is able to show that power.
Totally, totally. So different games will have different philosophies on this, right? So if we think about something like a Souls-like game, right, that has different weapons, the weapons will feel different, and that comes down to all the elements that Steve Swink's talking about, right? So if you think about like a big Buster Sword and like a swords and a Souls-like, right, that's going to have like a really slow attack because it's really delayed to make it feel heavy. There's going to be a big sound effect, right, of you like moving the thing, and another sound effect for hitting these things will be big and impactful, and you'll have a long delay. You're not going to be able to do anything for a second after you do that attack because of how heavy the thing is, right? So it'll feel distinct. Whereas if it's like a little sharp dagger or something like that, you want the attack to be really like short, right? And you would want the sound effects to be completely different. You'd want the animations to be completely different, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Make sense? Cool. Okie dokie. So some quick takeaways on game feel. This is a prescriptivist model. This tells you something about all aspects of the game. So if you have a particular game feel in mind, a particular way you want the game to feel to play, this tells you what are all the knobs you have to change to be able to make that game feel a certain way, right? This is player experience oriented, like OCR. It does work with the OCR loops, right? We can think about the feel of a particular loop that fits into the A of MDA or the player experience of EOGD. And it's a big takeaway that many of these frameworks are sort of complementary. I'm going to load up a thing real quick on the Unity side of things, just to give you an example of game feel, because I find that like just talking about game feel can be kind of like, well, okay, like I get it, right? But I just have a really quick example I want to show you. Ignore the name. That comes down to Juice, which is a different sort of framework for game design, very popular on the mobile game side of things. But it gives a good example of how it dovetails nicely with game feel. Okay, so here's our basic scene. So this is a tiny little platformer. You're not missing any sound effects or anything like that. You can see as I'm moving around there, we have a sort of slow delay, things like that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now let's look at the exact same thing. This is the exact same mechanics. All I've changed is some values on things to try to make this feel distinct. Let's see what happens. So we added a sound effect. We added like a zoom in on the hit. We added a sound effect and a sort of animation as it jumps to make it feel like we're actually sort of like stretching as we go. We have a big impact when we hit, right? It's all exactly the same mechanics. It's the same amount of time that I'm in the air. It's the same speed that I'm moving back and forth. But immediately this feels different, right? Just looking at this. Imagine me playing it, right? And the way it controls. Does that make sense? So it's an argument by Steve Swink to think about all these different elements and how they fit together and how they can lead to particular feelings in your player. Cool? Okay. Okie dokie. We're about 15 minutes past where I wanted to be, but that's fine. We're not going to move past this. We're going to talk about paper prototyping. So now that we've talked about game frameworks for a little bit, let's try to apply these. And rather than applying them in a digital sense, though obviously game feels best in a digital sense, that's why I gave you a digital example. But we're going to talk about these in terms of a paper prototyping activity. Who here has done paper prototyping before? One person? Okay. Let's look at a quick video. The music here is not important. This is a really elaborate paper prototype. You are not going to be this elaborate with your paper prototypes. You should not be. But we can see here how this works, right? This is for a sort of, an endless runner mobile application, right? And you can see that every single button, if we have one player playing the game by clicking on things with their actual hands, the other player is acting as a controller. And they're controlling what would be controlled with game logic or code, right, to be able to move things around on screen to match what the player has done. I'm going to jump ahead if oh, my mouse has been captured. Ah! Okay, there we go. I've saved my mouse. We're going to jump forward a little bit, right? We have different pieces of paper for the different menus. There you go. They've done clever things by cutting the paper so they can like slide things in. You don't have to get that complicated with it. But you got things to click, etc., etc. There's a lot of menuing here. I'm going to jump forward into actual quote-unquote gameplay. So we're getting to play. Okay, story mode or endless mode or picking our items. And here's the actual gameplay, right? So we have a player who's controlling the player in the middle. You can see they're using like folded out paper clips. You could probably use the coffee stirrers if you wanted to the same sort of effect on your own paper prototype. And then you have other players who are controlling the game. So who are like moving the various dynamic elements back and forth, right? So this is the idea of paper prototyping. You have a way for people to play the game, an initial attempt to sort of see if the game is any good, while you do all the hard work. What would be done with code is instead being done by hand by you. Make sense? Yeah? Sure, sure. But notably, right, a board game necessarily, a board game probably assumes that it's going to stay a board game. This is being used as a way of prototyping or sort of planning out what a digital game might look like. But we don't have to worry about any of the problems with making a digital game, like the time cost or coding or so on and so forth. So, prototyping problem. Why on earth would we prototype at all? Well, coding and creating content is tough, right? Anybody who's tried to do it would know it's tough to do. So how do you figure out if a game is any fun before you actually spend all the time and money and effort to make it? Well, you prototype, right? Pretty straightforward. So you can paper prototype, or you can use other simple, faster approaches. So for example, in the games industry, to this day, the most common way that games are prototyped is with a slideshow. You'll have somebody with a slideshow that's like, okay, this is what a screen of the game is like. If I hit the forward button, go forward a slide, this is what the game would look like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The reason for that is that developers are expensive in terms of their time, and it is not worth using them to prototype a game. So, paper prototyping. The idea here is that you want to use a single sheet of paper as your background screen. If you have more than one screen, so you might have multiple pieces of paper, big piece of paper. Then you have individual pieces of paper to represent sort of different dynamic or changing elements, your sprites or your game objects, right? So like the player, enemies, your score or HP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of how this will work, you generally have one person controlling the game, and then one or more people who play, or sorry, one person plays the game, one or more people controls the game, right? As the controller person or persons, you try not to tell the player what to do. You want to just give them sort of free reign and say, this is the sort of thing that you would have seen so far. Maybe tell them what a tutorial would have looked like in this game, but then let just them go for it. Because it's a useful way of figuring out, hey, what will happen if we just let people loose in this game? What information do they need to play the game? What bounds should there be? In terms of the suitability, this is best for sort of UI-heavy experiences, so it's often used to mock up mobile apps, right? It's not as good for games with real-time movement. If yours is the game that you'll be making in just a second, you want to focus on higher level decision making. So on the bottom right, I have an example. It's kind of hard to see, but it's a Super Mario Brothers sort of paper prototype, right? And in this case, you could just tell the player who's playing your game, okay, this is how high you can jump, this is how far you can move, et cetera, right? And then let them sort of do higher level decision making like that. In terms of its uses, this is forcing you to think about your game idea, right? What happens if I do this here, right? Because the player will do things you don't expect. I guarantee you the player will do things you don't expect, especially if you don't tell them what to do, which you shouldn't tell them what to do. And this will tell you things about your game. You'll learn things about your game. It also allows you to better understand what parts of the game you'll need. So if you're finding like, okay, I'm cutting out this piece of paper, this represents the player, and I'm cutting out this represents the enemy. Oh, but I wanted to have some sort of power up. Oh, I guess I need a piece of paper for that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know that by default, every single one of your pieces of paper needs to transform into a game object in whatever game engine you're using when you actually make this digitally. It also allows you to figure out if your game is any fun. So you're going to be doing this in just a second. You're going to start doing this with the time that we have left for today. And you're going to find people who are going to be playing your games. And if they're like laughing and having a good time or going like, oh, that's interesting, Yeah, you did it. You have a good idea that's worth developing. If people are like, I don't really get it, or like, oh, it's a cool idea, but I don't know, maybe it's worth iterating this idea before you spend actual time coding it up. Cool? Okay, so with that, you're going to come up with a simple game. That's going to be the name of this next little bit. And so I'm going to give you some suggestions about how to do this for this activity. The rest of this is not going to be very stream appropriate. I apologize because I'm going to be wandering around. People are going to be paper prototyping. But anyway,
Same sort of thing with some prototyping board games.
yeah,
We actually had the camera on one group that was scanning
I see.
stuff so that we could stream and watch along.
Sure, sure, sure. Sure, totally. So in terms of coming up with an idea for a game, I want you could, for example, imagine a cool moment or interaction of the game. Like, oh, if you do this in this game, it'd be so cool. This one big moment of like doing an input and having a big thing happen, right? So like a common example that I would often hear from one of my professors back in the day was like, oh, what if you had a game with like a chicken that could throw bombs and you had this like big chain explosion reaction? That's the cool moment that we want in this game. That sort of thing. You can draw on a non-game experience. You can say like, oh, I really like doing this activity in my day-to-day life. What if that was a video game? You can take inspiration from prior games. This is the most common thing to do. In parentheses, you could do what I just did earlier, right? Where I like ask you for some bits. You act like, let me put that together and make a game. You can also use this as an excuse to test a game idea that you've had for a while, but you're going to be put into groups. And so maybe you want to do something that's more collaborative. In terms of taking inspiration from prior games, you can see some examples here. You might say like, oh, there was a mini game in that game I really liked. What if that was its whole own game? Or what if there's an existing genre with a twist? So this is VVVVVV, right? Which is, or VVVVV. Enough of these are probably in there, which is a platformer game where you can't jump, you can just reverse gravity, right? Or you can simplify an existing game. So we talked about this a bit this morning, right? About World of Warcraft and how that got simplified down into Dota. All right, with that, we've got to the activity instructions. So what I want you to do is get into groups of roughly 3 or 4, come up with a game or type of game that you want to make, and then build your paper prototype. This is roughly at sketch quality. Do not spend a lot of time. It's fine for it to be a stick figure for the player. Don't overthink it, right? Have a paper cut out for your characters, have at least one big piece of paper to represent a background. Over here on the left, you can see big pieces of paper, but you can also get little cardstock, which would be good for the dynamic elements you want to move around, right? There's also tape and scissors over there, and a lot of markers and a lot of pencils. Test your paper prototype with each other. So I'm going to give you roughly, I don't know, 30 minutes for step 3. So you got to go fast. Do not spend a lot of time bloviating over, oh, is this a good game idea? I don't know. First thing you come up with, just go ahead and do it. You can always iterate on it. This is a process for iterating. And then you're going to iterate on your paper prototype based on your feedback from each other playing it. And then return to step 4 until time is up. And then we'll gather together at the end to discuss what this was like. Make sense? Any questions? I don't care the answer of, oh, can I work by myself? I don't care. The answer of, can I work with just 2 people? I don't care. I recommend working with more people because guess what? That will give you more hands and you can put together a prototype faster. And I will make you test your prototypes even if you're just a single person. But it's up to you. Cool? Okay, go.
We like volunteer to streaming through.
I'll just put this big. Oops, didn't do that. No, I didn't want to do that. I want the activity instructions on the board. There we go. Up, 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 up.
We always have up here. Okay, close enough. See if I can get your front door too.
Sure. We could also just move it this way and try to like focus it on the group of folks.
There's still that fitness stuff, so I don't want to necessarily the entire crowd.
Sure, sure, sure.
See you.
Totally. That's fair.
I already did the Fitbit announcement yesterday. It's fine.
I mean, I can just do a paper prototype up here. I can perform paper prototyping for the crew. Ugh, ugh. I'll do it this way. Ah, we can even zoom in. Look at that. We can see a board. I don't need a whole piece of this. Half piece will do. Ah! How do we make our microtransactions shop a flow state? Yeah, good question. Hopefully you got to OCR answered that question for you. I think that's probably Gavin speaking. Darth Pickman.
Yeah,
Packman.
that's
That would make sense. Well, that was at the very beginning, right?
yeah.
That's before we got to OCR. Mm-hmm. You could.
Yeah.
So here I will narrate. This feels like an ASMR video. Not that this is like this. This is going to be our character, player character. Let's add some weapons. So we'll add a big sword. I'm not an artist, unless that, in case that was not super, super obvious. There's our big sword. There we go. And then let's add some sort of little sword, little dagger. Let's add a basic enemy. And then let's add a bigger enemy. There we go. And then I need a player upgrade or a weapon upgrade thing. Oh, and I also need like VIP points. Just do like a little circle. It says VIP. And it comes out when you kill the basic enemy. And then let's do a weapon upgrade scene. Upgrade weapon. Yes. No. There we go. So there's my paper prototype. So we'll do something where we'll start the player. I want to get little like coffee stirrers or something just to tape these together. But start the player over here. They'll have like two sticks here, allow you to like move over here and control this. They'll have this guy at first, and I'll control that guy over here. And then when they kill this thing, they'll get a VIP point, and then they'll collect that by running into it. They'll get upgrade weapons show up. If they hit no, nothing happens. This will just go away, and a scarier enemy will show up, which can't just die in one hit. And then if they do upgrade the weapon, yes, then I will replace their little sword with a big sword, and then they'll face the bigger enemy. So that's my tiny little paper prototype. See a tiny little version of that sort of game loop. I'm going to run away and grab some coffee stirrers or just some pencils, because we have a lot of pencils, and tape things to them just for ease of this. I'm going to steal some coffee stirrers.
Steal whatever you
Yeah, here we go.
want.
Let's see, that's 3, 4, 5. There we go, perfect. Oh, I've got enough. Thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just needed 5. Yeah, you want to put your characters on little sticks.
I want you to do what you want.
Oh, I think I taped that on backwards.
Yeah, post-it notes.
Nice. We'll just deal with that. That's gonna be left out.
I want to pull down from the
All right. I need 1 for each of these. There we go. And I have tons of extra time here because I've done this before. So I'll probably decorate the background. Okay. Okay. You should by now already have your game idea. If you don't already, get that game idea as soon as possible and start working on breaking down the list of things you're going to need to do. Try to delegate, so have different people working on different game elements so that you're not just all sitting around. If you're finding you're already at the point where you've got something running, you can test it internally or work on improving what things look like. So we have lots of extra time, so I'm going to make so have a little bit of an aura around them. Look a little bit less intimidating for the littler one, and then a more intense one for the later one. We'll add blue on the character because the character is always blue. Why is there an arrow? That's just the direction the character is pointing. We'll add some beautiful shading. Yeah, beautiful. Let's also make the sword blue. My spouse could see me doing really bad shading. I'm sure they really like it. Make the VIP points a little bit more exciting. Beautiful. And then let's make the background a little bit more intriguing. So let's see, let's add some like bushes and trees and stuff like that. These could also be considered rocks. It doesn't really matter. These are supposed to be like little grass specks. I don't know if that's going to be clear, going to read okay. Cool. That looks a little bit nicer. Even for a paper prototype, it can be helpful to have just a little bit of sense of like what would the aesthetics of the game actually look like. I'm gonna let's see, we'll put a green lines around our yes and red lines around our no. Even though you shouldn't do red green colors blind stuff, or else you shouldn't do red and green in game because of red green color blindness. Okay, we'll hide that. Put that over there. With that, I think this is about as much work as I can put in on this. It's a very simple little paper prototype. I'm now going to probably wander the room, so I'll disappear for a second, but I'll be back. I'll have people play test this momentarily. Whoa. Yeah. Am I doing on time? Okay. We're doing all right. So we got safe though. I got him. Don't over stress on making it look good. It's not about looking good. Good. Love to hear about it. Stick figures and squares is good. You should be at the point where you can playtest this within your group. So have some members of your group control it and have other groups act as the player within the next 10-ish minutes. So about 10-minute warning, you should be able to playtest this with yourself within your groups. You'll also need to establish roles of who in the group is controlling what. If you're stuck on something, let me know. I'm happy to help. Appreciate it. That's great. It's true. I do. I do have the mic. Anyone can hear. Gosh.
Let's keep that last 5 minutes.
Goodness.
How's your day been? Good.
Yeah, it's been fine. I think they responded pretty well to the Unity stuff we did earlier. So that was good. Didn't get quite as far as I wanted. We had some technical hurdles by some students, but otherwise it was good.
I was
That was kind of tricky.
Well, some of them did, some of them didn't. It was very weird. We got there. Yeah. All right. Glad we're inside where it's nice and air conditioned. Good time to be inside talking about video games.
Yeah, Cap's good talk.
Okay.
So I'll take you home after.
Oh, thank you.
Great. I'm in that direction. Joseph's in this direction.
Sounds great. Really appreciate it.
Well, no problem.
Okay, got 5 minute warning. 5 minutes, you should be able to at least play it within your groups yourselves. If you're able to hit that already, make sure that you're sort of ready for somebody else to come along and play it. You can always also improve your visuals, quote unquote. That's the spirit. Oh, look at the color it's happening. It's so intense.
Right. Yeah. But then we
Lots of components. Do consider how many components you're giving yourself to have to control when you're playing this. You can't use your entire team to control it either. Well, because you're going to have to send somebody else to go out there and playtest other people's. Otherwise, there's no point in the activity if you're just hanging out by yourself. You didn't want to take part? No? All right. Just hanging out with ChatGPT? Oh, a health bar? Looking great. Some sort of baby game happening? All right.
It's just hard to because once you get close, it's like, well, yeah, wherever you go. But
Good thinking through things. If y'all are done, I can go ahead and play your list yours. So who am I controlling?
it's not the grappling hook that's up.
Okay,
So that actually
that's fine. I can imagine that. Where do I start?
here.
Right here. Okay. Okay. Can I grapple hook up here?
Not far.
I'm too far. Okay. How do I know that it's too far?
Because it won't reach.
But how will I know that it won't reach? Will I get like a little animation coming out of it? Okay.
It just doesn't it, and then you're like, oh, well, I guess I gotta go here.
Well, hold on, you're telling me what to do. You don't want to do that. You want to let me know. So is this supposed to be a gap right here?
Um, right here and right here, yes.
Okay. So okay, then I will grapple to here. So it allows me to get to here. Are these arrows in the game? Are they pushing me, pointing me to directions?
The idea was that that thing was a boulder you'd have to pull down, but we can actually communicate that better.
Well, you could have added a new piece of paper, right? If you had a new piece of paper, you could have it be a dynamic thing. When you launch it there, then you just move it rectangular, right? Easy peasy. Yeah, there you go. Well, post-it note's going to be sticky, but that's fine. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, the arrows were meant to like demonstrate.
Sure. I mean, I like the idea, like, Nintendo games a lot of the time will have some sort of like arrow that's like, oh, beautiful. You might want to trim some edges so it sort of fits in your gap a little bit better. But yeah, that could totally work, right? That's in your way. And then if I grapple onto that, then you can have it come down like this. And now can I jump? Is there an additional jump button? Okay, so I can jump up to here. And then I have some sort of skeletons ahead of me, which is very scary. Can I grapple the skeletons? What happens if I grapple the skeleton?
Skeletons, because we need to do that later. But hang on. Well,
You can grapple skeletons.
Uh-huh.
However,
but in this case, that just leaves you trapped on the platform with the skeletons.
Oh, so I was kind of thinking that if I was like right here, the skeleton might be grappled and then like drop into the pit.
You know what? That makes sense. Let's say that happens.
Okay, so now we've learned something new about the game, right? In terms of how that works. Okay. But then this one's just hanging out in that zone.
you can also jump over skeletons.
Oh, so I don't know about my jump height. If you told me that like my jump height was a certain number of squares, then I could like go to here and then jump over here. And then I could jump to here and jump to here. And then it looks like there's a portal. So I'll try to grapple the portal.
Bullseye to aim the target.
Okay. So I aim and I hit the target, and then what happens?
The idea was you hit that to use it to avoid the skeletons. So
Wait, how do I use it to avoid the skeletons?
Like grapple over.
But I couldn't grapple this far. So why can I grapple this far?
That's more or less a consequence that we didn't design the map very well.
Okay, but this is an important thing as well to think about, right? But you could think about as well, right? Okay, like, first of all, you could just scratch out all of this and like there's just no height over here. That'd be fine. But it does look like I'm supposed to go up here eventually. So
I'm just going to make the spike pit double-sided and hope that more or less means the case.
that you shouldn't be grappling up there. So now if I do grapple up there from the start, do I die?
Yes.
Okay, phenomenal. It's great to die. Okay. So let's say that I get to here, and let's say that I grapple to this bullseye point. So this allows me to get over these skeletons. Now I get to here.
Down on.
Okay. So then I can grapple to here. If I grapple to somewhere, do I like hold there?
Yes.
Okay. So that's important to know. So when I grapple to somewhere, I hold onto that, then I can grapple to there. And then what happens if I grapple onto this thing?
It
Shut.
pulled down and falls, and if you were trying to do it from there, it would crush you and kill
Sure. So
you. Probably a bit.
Sure. So is there a distinction between things that will get pulled when I grapple them versus things that I will be pulled to when I grapple them?
I feel like that would be definitely about maybe taller.
Well, you sort of have that already, right? With like the blue things are well, sort of, except that these things don't quite work like that, right? But maybe you could add like a highlight, like if you grabbed any other color and you put it around the boulder and also this thing, then it would be like, oh, okay. So these is a way to differentiate between these are the things that I will be pulled to versus these are the things that that will pull to me, right?
For now, we'll just add an arrow and just think arrow.
Okay. This is the like the yellow paint debacle, if you saw that, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have no, you didn't. This is some gamers getting mad that like people put yellow paint on like objects in the environment that you can interact with, right? It's because gamers don't actually notice otherwise unless you do this, right?
It's getting so like high fidelity that it's hard to differentiate background elements and things you can interact.
Totally. Okay, so now that I see that there's these arrows, also you might want to like scratch out these other arrows or do something with them if you don't intend for them to be there, but that's certainly up to you. Then we go to there, this goes here. You might also want to scratch out this background thing. I can then go up to this one, go over to here, and then I can try to grapple. Oh, there's more enemies. Okay. Oh, there's flying skeletons. So can I grapple to like one skeleton, then to another, then to the chest? Okay, cool, sick. But hopefully it was obvious how even just from that, like we learned so much more about how your game works and like what it needs to convey and like what are the mechanics of the game and how would you implement them. Does it make sense? Awesome.
Sure.
Okay, so let's see here. It's a nice start. Okay, if you haven't already, you need to run this in like the next 3 minutes internally with your group. When you're running it with your group, you will probably play it in the way you intend to. As soon as someone shows up, as one group just learned, you will play it in a game they don't intend to. That's good. You're learning from that. Try not to tell people as they're coming out how to play it, but do get to the point right now, like right in the next 2 minutes, that you know the certain number of your team are going to be the controllers for the game, and somebody else can go off and play test other people's games. Okay? Okay, 2 minute warning. In 2 minutes, I will ping you, and you have to go around and send people around.
I'm just thinking like this will
Okay. With that, we have now hit time. This is your time limit. We have a number of groups. We have a group here, one in the back of the room here. And then we have two over here, and then I have a paper prototype over here that will be on the stream. Send somebody from your group to at least one of the other groups. If you finish a playtest, go to another group. Keep cycling around. We'll go for about 5 or 10 minutes. Then you'll return to your groups, iterate on whatever the sort of feedback from the paper prototype was, and do it all again. Sounds good? All right, go ahead. Sure, yeah, come on over here. So you control these two things.
Okay.
So you have a character, and then you separately have a weapon. So this is your character, that's your weapon. You have to move them sort of close to each other, but there's a little bit of wiggle room here. It's a little floaty,
Okay.
right? And so you're sort of moving through the environment. Yeah, exactly, just like that.
So kind of a rotational, like those kind of bullet hells where it has the
Yeah, a little
external
bit of an
shift.
arc. Yeah. You can just move it up and down for now. Don't worry about an arc. That's perfectly fine. So if you're wandering around, move around, do whatever you like. So at some point we'll have an enemy pop out.
Tilt my weapon,
Uh-huh. And stab?
blast it, stab,
Okay.
stab or blast.
That's a great question. I was thinking about it as just being a collision, so you just have to hit it with it. But it could be a blast. I think this is more of a melee weapon. My art skills are betraying me here. And then we kill that, then you get a VIP point that shows up. So you moved into that, so that means you've collected it. As soon as you've collected one, this is the initial weapon of the game, this pops up.
Oh, I guess I'll go with yes.
Okay, I'm going to take this away from you then,
Okay.
and I'll return you this bigger weapon.
Oh, okay. Bigger, I guess, bigger stabby.
Uh-huh.
Maybe explore around. What?
Eventually another bigger enemy pops up.
Oh,
and,
I rotate in time.
Oh, if you can't rotate, you're dead.
Yeah.
But you just hit it with your body as opposed to with the weapon. You got to hit it with the weapon. Yeah, there we go. So you would have died if you'd done that.
Okay.
But now we've learned something.
Yeah.
Then it happens there. You've killed that one. More VIP points. That's the end of our little paper prototype. Yeah.
So I think the only thing is I was kind of confused as to what
How
the
that would
amount of
move.
movement is inside.
Sure,
of that. So
totally.
would you say like maybe get like a ring and put one of those like? See, what I might do is get a ring, get one of those little the pivot point things,
Sure,
and
sure,
then
sure.
allow it to.
That would be a very like war game way to do it, right? Like you have basically like the arrow of effect. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
With the spinner around it.
And then it has the probabilities, and we roll some dice, and it tells you where it lands.
But yeah, so I would say that's.
Yeah. I think it would probably be more along the lines of, at least for this paper prototype, of all you can do is sort of move up and down in this fashion rather than an arc.
I see.
Just because I think rotating might be a bit much when we're sort of unidimensional like this.
Yeah.
For an actual game, for sure, we would need some way to like move to where you click, right?
Yeah, because I'm just sitting here thinking about those. What are those like the little pins?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of
Yeah, little pinwheels. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then have it so you could kind of.
No. Yeah, I think that'd be a great way to do it.
Yeah, but don't have the tools here today.
Not today. That's all right though.
Yeah. But I mean, it's amazing what you can do with the dollars. Dollars, Costco, and Staples.
Exactly.
And here you are, and you got already down the road.
Yeah, and we know generally what components we would need, right, in terms of each of these different little individual things. We know we need some like sub-menu stuff, some logic for that.
Because the other thing there is even with upgrade weapon, it's like, well, if I hit no and I keep the smaller dagger, can I save up, or is there a counter for the
yeah,
or something along those lines?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
No, we would definitely need some sort of counter if this was like an actual full thing.
Yeah. Is there some difference between the two enemies, or is it just?
I think that it'd be probably something like the number of hits.
Okay, so this might be like 2 hits because he's more angry and
exactly
has horns.
That was what I was trying to with my incredible art skills to convey.
Maybe even you hit it once and it turns into this.
Oh, that's a clever way to do it. I like that. That's great.
So you got some visualization to do.
That's a good idea. I'll do that for the next round if any other student shows up and tries to play my game.
Super.
Thanks a bunch for playtesting.
Well, I want to make sure the stream will.
Yeah, exactly. Those...
Find out what do we got.
Sure. So this is the game that we were all working on together. So you control these two aspects. This is your player character. You can move sort of left, right, and up and down in this way. And this is your weapon. It moves with your character. So sort of hold your hands close together, and all it can do is sort of move up and down in this way. Okay? So that's you. You start over there.
Okay. I never lost from the far side. So my weapon is why go up and down in this relative to this one?
Yeah. It's that sort of motion. So if you just start there, where would you do? What would you do?
I'd go over here to explore what's going on.
Okay, well, at some point you'd pop up over this sort of range, and we'd get an enemy to spawn in when that happens, who starts moving towards you.
Trying to down like this.
And you kill it. So that's killed. And as soon as you do that, and it's sort of a little thing would spawn in. So what would you do with that?
Zoom out red to be a.
Sure. So as soon as you pick that up, because this is like the very beginning of the game, we'd have this little menu pop up in front of you, so you can't control anything else right now.
Well, obviously, you're going to do this.
Okay. So in that case, I will take your little sword from you, and you get a big sword now.
And I'll try and explore something else back over here.
Yep. So after a little bit of time, a new enemy pops in, and again starts like moving towards you. What do you do?
This with it.
Okay, so you hit it the first time, and then it turns into the small enemy.
Try hitting it again.
And you've killed it again. You get another VIP point. The whole thing continues again.
It's the same cycle.
Exactly.
Fun.
Yeah, it's a little loop. Thank you very much. Any thoughts?
I see. Right away, I look at this. I'm seeing this is a little bit of the old ash joints.
Totally.
So the only other thing would be like, I'm here and I do something, all of a sudden I pop over here. Right?
That would be fun.
I like that part of the old ash joint. Remember, you do something, say, "Oh, I'm dying," so I'll hit the hyperspace leap or whatever and pop.
Sure. Yeah, you could have like some sort of dash ability or a dodge.
So when you're losing last-ditch effort to try something fun, right?
Sure, totally. Would you like to play my little prototype? Sure. Okay. So you have these two pieces. This is your player character. You can move left, right, up, and down. This is your sword. You should hold your dagger. You should hold it close to your character. All it can do is move up and down relative to your character. Okay, just sort of a sawing motion. Okay, so that's where you would start. What do you do? Sure. So when you get to about there, we'd have an enemy spawn in and starts heading towards you. What do you do from there? Okay, so you'd hit the enemy, it would then disappear, and we get a little pop-up that would show up. Okay, so as soon as you collect the coin, we get a little ding or whatever, and this would show up on top of your character, so you can't move anything else. What would you do from there? Of course. So in that case, I'll take your little dagger, and we'll replace that with this big sword. And what do you do from there? Well, there's no enemies on screen right now, so what do you do? Sure. So as soon as you walk around for a little bit, we get a new enemy spawning in and starts heading towards you again. What do? So if you hit it once, turns into the little enemy and it keeps on trying to get at you. I hit it again, turns into a VIP point. You collect that, and that's the loop, and it keeps on going from there. Cool?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm going to wander around and play them for sure. Stream won't be able to see, but they'll hear my voice vaguely describing what's happening. Oh my goodness, elaborate art. Oh yeah, we can wait till they're done with this debrief.
You play as a dragon, protects its castle.
Okay.
So like.
Well, you don't need to tell me anything about that. Just tell me, like, what are the controls and where do I start? Try not to tell me more.
Oh, don't pay attention to those two buttons. They're rudimentary.
Okay. So you can move up and down. Okay.
There are two types of attack.
Okay.
Just a flea attack, and it just takes down one enemy, and there is a fire breath, which
Okay.
is a special attack. It consumes mana.
Sure.
And it wipes out the entire row of enemies.
Okay. All right. So the game starts. I'm moving up and down. Oh, I have to click. Oh, okay. I have to take a seat. Oh, okay. Elaborate. Okay. All right, here I am. I'm at the beginning of the game. I'm moving up and down. I'm clicking because it's just fun to click. What happens? Okay. Is it in the same? I can't really tell. Are they in the same track or different tracks? Okay, so I'm going to claw this one first. All right, then I'll move down. I'll claw this one. And then I'll move up. I'll claw this one.
So overpowered.
Move down, move down. So this is a really important piece of feedback. Oh, move up actually. Hit claw. Move down, claw.
Yeah.
No, bring him more enemies.
Okay, so now we have multiple enemies. So I'll go up, and I'll fire breath. Just clear out that row, go down. This is just one claw. Just one claw.
Oh, and have in total 12 mana points. So you
Sure.
And it costs 4, so that's basically 3 fireballs.
Sure. Claw, up, claw, down, claw. Is that the end?
It's for like 45 seconds.
Sure, that's totally fine. So I think you're getting things immediately, right? Which is like the balance of these kinds of things is really tough, right? How do you set it up so there isn't just one dominant strategy? Like if I'm fast enough to go up and down and just like claw over and over again, why shouldn't I ever just do that infinitely, right? If you do something where you have, right now you have it up so each single piece of paper is a single enemy, that makes it really hard for your controllers to actually do this. But if you did something where you had another piece of paper that was like 5 enemies in a row, right? Then you could say something like, oh, it's all moving at once. It doesn't matter how often you're clawing. If there's like another enemy doing down over here, you can't possibly like balance both of these things at once. Now it makes sense. There's sort of an optimal play, which is to use the fire breath, right? You can think about it this way, right? Like gamers are really good at optimizing the game and like playing it in the most optimal way, and which often means being in the most boring way possible and like not using the full variety of things available to them. So if you set up a situation where the best thing to do is to use all the things available to you, that will make it more fun because there's like forcing you to have variety to it, right? Cool, nice job. Is this available? Yeah. All right. What's my player character? What do I do? That's my character. Okay. And what can I do in this game?
Jump.
Move forward and jump. Okay. So I'm moving this way, moving this way. There's some sort of devil plane that I see. Okay. This looks like it's on fire.
Yes.
Okay. but I'm gonna jump into this,
Yeah, I think
and then I'll hit here. Do I die if I hit the fire?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just dead now.
Yes. So you have to start playing the game.
Okay,
Keep going.
so keeping going. So what happens when I hit this? Did anything happen when I hit
So
that?
that's the power up.
Okay.
So you hit that power up. And
Okay.
then you hit here.
Wait. So if I jump here, I can jump all this way?
Yes. From
Okay, so it would be good to know that like how many of these I can move. So like knowing I can go from here to here is useful. And if you think about it, like if I had just started here, imagine this was the very beginning of your game actually, right? I would have no way to know how far I can jump,
Yeah.
right? So there's this concept in like Nintendo games of giving people an opportunity where you introduce a mechanic, you give them an opportunity to practice, and then you give them a challenge point, right? So your level right now is starting with a challenge,
Yeah.
right? So you haven't introduced me to what's happening. There hasn't been a chance to practice, right? But if instead there was like immediately just a gap right here, right, that was the same distance as this gap, I would know, oh, okay, I die to that gap because I didn't jump far enough, or it forces me, okay, I have to learn that's how far I can jump, such that I know I can jump from here to here, right? Okay, but let's ignore that for now. So I'm going over here, I'm jumping, I'm getting the power up, I get to here. Okay, there's a little candle that's going up and down. Oh, I time it. So I'm going to jump, so the candle's down, I get another one, and then I get to the end, right?
or you get hit by.
Oh, how did I get hit by that? What
So
happened?
if you jump and then.
Oh, I see. So I have to time both of these together.
Exactly.
Okay. Got it. So this is where, like, again, you only have a single sheet of paper. You could potentially have a second sheet of paper or just do like a revised version of this if you wanted to. But if you did something where like, okay, let me see a version of it where it's just the candle, you don't have to have multiple candles. You could just have, I'm going to have the candle here and then I'm move it over here when you get over here, right? But like just the candle and then just the plane and then like, ooh, let's have them both together. So you're having to like time out without both of them, right? This is giving you a chance to introduce these ideas before you combine them together, right? But yeah, nice job. All right. What's happening over here? Oh, you've got a playtester. Never mind. You figured it out? You figured everything out?
You can move around, turn around. What it did, you can grab it. And then it's like,
So this is doing a lot of explaining. I'd recommend not giving this much information. Just give like, here's my starting position and here are the mechanics that you have and just see what the player does. Because you'll learn a lot more than if you say like, oh, this is the way that you interact with the world. Does that make sense? Because you'll see like, oh, if I don't tell them anything, here's how they try to interact with the world. And then that tells you something as a game designer about like, oh, how do you have to like explain these things in the game so people will know how to use it? Does it make sense? Sorry, not meaning to interrupt, but it's a useful thing. Did you make any changes to the pair prototype? Not yet? Okay. Let me check in with the end folks here.
yes.
So that's an important thing, knowing that you can move down through there, right? So like how could you convey that to the player?
Love to tell them like at the start.
Think about this like if it was an actual digital game, right? You're not going to sit there next to them when they're playing the actual digital game, right? So how could you do it with like the visuals of the game or like with a sound effect when you're over a platform you can go through, right? Things like this. Okay, 1 minute warning. I'm going to ask you return to your groups in 1 minute and discuss the feedback you've gotten. Finish up any current prototypes, playtests, and head on back. Okay, return to your groups. Return to your groups. You're gonna have about 8 minutes to do some rapid updates, whether that's changing out some of the visuals to try to better communicate information, whether that's changing out to add new components or remove components. Take about 8 minutes and try to come up with a new variation, a new iteration of the game. And discuss what people did. Did you have anybody else playtest it but me? Ah, come on. Where did your partner go? Maybe to the washroom.
Out playing games.
Okay. Well, even just for me, you did have some feedback, things you could think about adding. So might think about making some changes.
Because
All right, not a lot of time, so 5 minutes. Make your changes in 5 minutes. Hopefully you've discussed now what worked or didn't work in the playtests. Okay, only about a minute or two until you need to do another round of playtesting. Get to the point where you can at least playtest your changes within your group in the next minute or so. Perfect. There we go. Another update loop. Hmm. Okay. We're nearly out of time. Finish up your current changes and send somebody else out to playtest other people's games.
Why not?
All right, can I play this one?
Go ahead.
All right, so who am I? Where do I start? Okay. What mechanics do I got? Okay. Okay. So a jump is a bigger thing. This is turn-based game?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like a strategy of some sort.
Turn.
Okay, so if I were just to look at this, I would have no idea of where I was supposed to go or what I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
I would guess that there's an enemy. And if I'm just like hitting some random buttons, do I have any sort of attack animation?
You would have an animation where you swing your little sword.
Okie dokie. All right. That's all I need to know. No worries. You don't have to say more. Yeah, no, that's fine. You already mentioned the jump. Okay, so I'll jump to here. That's my turn. Yeah, it's all right. Okay, so this guy is like getting the high ground on me. I don't want that. So I'm going to jump up to here.
Yeah. Now it's his turn. And that thing.
Don't say
should
any.
be glowing.
Don't. Oh, okay, it's glowing. That's good to know. Okay, so it's my turn. I'm going to grab my glowing thing. What happens then?
Now you turn into this guy.
Ah, okay. Now I have a bow. That's
You
cool.
hit that same button
Yeah, I see.
that
It
makes
shoots
your
a
sword
thing.
swing. It'll
Yeah,
let the
yeah.
thing shoot.
Okay, so then your turn. Okay, so there's an interesting thing that just happened just then. I don't know if you noticed, right? Because you were trying to figure out what do you do as this character,
Yeah.
right? And as the game developer, you actually need to assign like, oh, this is the behavior that the enemies should have. So this is the thing to figure out. And the fact that you delayed suggests to me you hadn't discussed it yet as a group.
Yeah.
What do the enemies do?
He was just missing the previous turn when everything was happening.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like, don't worry about it.
Okay, sure. Okay, so if I shoot, is it just in a straight line?
Yes.
Does shooting use my turn?
So, yes.
Okay, so I just
still-
shot and
You
it used
still
my
be
turn.
able to move.
Oh,
You can
okay.
move and attack in the same turn.
Oh, okay. I did not realize that.
The next
Okay.
weapon to nothing.
All right, I'll move back to here then.
And you've been, or I can't tell you, but a bomb just appeared. It has a little fizzling thing.
Sure. And it'll come down towards me, assumably. All right.
I would get off that platform.
Sure. All right, I'll jump down to here and I'll shoot.
Just bomb calls on the platform and blows up. But
Sure.
you shoot.
I shot.
So that now a coin. We resolve. So we don't have dodging or any.
Sure, that's fine.
So resolve everything with the coin flip.
You have
Um,
100.
Head. What's that?
They had the point
Mm-hmm.
mechanic.
So if it was head, so he dodged that attack.
Okay.
And
So when it's a coin flip,
Yeah.
are you imagining this is like an actual sort of visualized in the game coin flip that happens?
And if it was an actual game, we'd have
Like a
you'd
50%
have
dodge roll or whatever?
bonuses that you'd be able to move around. This is just a
Okay.
the-
But then
the limitations of the paper.
Sure. But there's a difference here around like the skill versus the sort of probabilistic simulation, right? So like there's no way for me to say like, oh well, I'm a very good player.
Yeah.
And so therefore I should hit all the time.
Yeah.
Right? But okay, that's fine. Okay, all right, well that was my turn. Monsters goes.
So that's fine.
All right, well I'm gonna shoot again.
You're hitting him.
Yes.
He attacked you because he could attack and move on the same turn.
Sure.
So we flip a coin again. Tails, you dodged him.
Okay.
Tails.
I'm tails, okay. All right, I'm gonna shoot him again.
Heads, he dodged. Everyone's dodging.
So you might think about
Limitation of the coin flip.
Sure. But you can think about like there's dice over there, right? You could have grabbed dice. And you could think about like, oh, okay, even if I'm doing an approximation of skill here,
Yeah.
if I'm right on top of the character, I can probably hit him better.
Yeah.
And you can think about even with a single coin flip, maybe I get multiple coin flips depending on how close the character is, right? This might be ways of simulating these things. Cool? Okay, so we're just gonna go back and forth and hit each other forever, right? Or is there anything else that would happen here besides just going back and forth?
After 3 turns,
Another bomb shows up.
a bomb would appear and they would fall and would damage both of you.
Sure, gotcha. Okay, so this is nice. I like the bomb idea because this is going to force me to move around. That's great. I love that idea. But otherwise, it's just sort of hitting back and forth. Do we each have 1 HP? Do we have multiple HP?
So you have 4 HP.
Oh my
and
goodness.
you slide it.
Okay, but there is this sort of problem of like my sort of incentive is because I can only shoot in a straight line, right? And your design is such that like all these patent platforms are in different heights. And given your enemy's behavior, but just joining me this way, right? And now that I have this, I'm sort of incentivized, or even if I had the sword, I'm sort of incentivized to just stay at this level, right? Or to like lure the enemy over to like another platform, right? Where we could hang out on. So you could think about, this is where level design comes in, right? Is there a way that you could have this level design in such a way that would encourage me not to just basically like get in a situation where I'm just 1 step away from the enemy's 1 step away from me, and we're sort of trading blows until somebody kills each other. I like the bombs because it forces movement, but the level design itself is encouraging sort of still that same kind of getting into this static way of playing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Next prototype. Rah.
It's a survivor-based game, so you got like 1 hit. Yeah, they're coming to us. So,
Ah, I like the sticky hand. That's great.
so that we can also throw
Sure.
just the okay. I don't really truck the garbage that accepts here.
Nice.
Yeah, like I always like to but I feel like I'm going to do something. You know, you're not you well, see the last thing is one thing speed like this I see what this on like it looks scary. Why yeah, but it looks like it's a big but I don't feel like two of them yeah, maybe you can either throw a punch or just the future. Sure to play or fact jump I don't know. Something like or
Okay, if I can get your attention for just a second, you don't have to stop, but we're technically at time. It's at 6 p.m., if you can believe it. Time flies when you're having fun. So just get a show of hands. Who in this experience found themselves learning something surprising about the game they had designed? Yeah, so that seems useful. Who found that in the iteration process they were able to solve some of the problems from the first round? Nice. Who found that there were still problems? There we go, right? So this is the benefit of paper prototyping. You're going to learn a lot more about your game design. You're going to be forced to actually think about things you didn't think you're going to have to think about, and you can iterate on it to continually make progress on the game before you write a single line of code. Such that when you're writing the line of code, you're pretty confident that you got a pretty nice game design all set as long as you can implement it correctly. Sounds good? Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you again tomorrow for Game AI stuff. Sure, you can take a picture to reminder your it if you want to, but otherwise, yeah, just throw it in the recycling.